Beast of Reincarnation is not really a story about bad combat. It might actually be, the opposite. Because when this game puts Emma and Ku in a fight that actually pushes their mechanics, Beast can be pretty freaking good. I mean, you have parries, you have timing, you have resources to manage, you have Ku's abilities layered on top of Emma's direct combat. And instead of your companion just, following you around like an emotional backpack, Ku actually affects the way you fight. The problem is that Beast of Reincarnation doesn't always seem to know what to do with the combat system it created. Because once you leave those stronger encounters, the game around that combat can start feeling considerably more basic. And that's what makes, Beast so frustrating. Game Freak may have already solved one of the hardest problems in an action RPG. They gave the combat an identity. I'm just not convinced they built the right game around it. The signal is the relationship between Emma's defensive combat and Ku's abilities. On the surface, this looks like another action game with a companion system, except Beast is doing something more interesting. Emma's combat feeds Ku. Your defensive play creates opportunities. You parry correctly, you build resources. These resources give you more options through Ku. Then those abilities can create another opening for Emma. It creates a loop. Defend, generate, command, capitalize, repeat. And that matters because Ku isn't completely separate from the combat system. He's part of the combat system. And when Beast actually puts pressure on you, that relationship starts making sense. A boss attacks aggressively. You have to read what it's doing. You parry, you respond. You decide when to spin what you've generated. Now you're just not hitting the attack button until somebody falls over. You're managing a small combat economy in the middle of a sword fight. That's the good part. But then you leave that encounter. And that is where the problem starts showing itself. You walk through another stretch of the world, fight another basic group, move through another similar environment, run into enemies that don't always demand everything the combat system can actually do. And suddenly this interesting machine Game Freak built isn't really being pushed anymore. It's like somebody gave you a 6-speed manual transmission and then put you on a road where the speed limit is like 25 or 24 or something. The machine still works, but you're barely getting to even utilize it. The deeper issue is not whether Beast of Reincarnation has good mechanics. The issue is whether the rest of the game creates enough situations where those mechanics matter. Because mechanics do not exist in isolation. This is where game design gets more complicated than just saying, the combat feels good. Alright, compared to what? And good doing what? A combat system needs enemies capable of testing it. Those enemies need encounters capable of creating pressure. Those encounters need spaces that change how you approach them. Progression needs new abilities that solve new problems. Everything feeds into everything else. That's the system. Break enough links in that chain, and even a great mechanic starts losing its impact. You can build an incredible parry mechanic, but if the enemies rarely make you master it, eventually it's just another button. You can give the player 10 interesting abilities, but if 3 of them solve almost every encounter, the other 7 might as well be decoration. You can make an enormous environment, but if moving through it keeps producing the same, experience, size isn't giving you variety, it's giving you distance. That's a distinction. And Beast seems strongest when everything comes together. The tougher fights, the bosses, the one where Emma and Ku both matter. Those encounters are actually evidence in the game's favor, because they show that the foundation works. That's crucial. If the combat itself were fundamentally broken, then this would be a much simpler conversation, but that isn't what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a game occasionally showing me exactly what it could have been, then taking that version away again. That's worse in a different way, because now you can see the potential. You know the system can produce something better, because you've already played the evidence. Then comes another stretch where the world isn't asking enough from you. Then another encounter that feels similar. Then another section where the game starts leaning more heavily on atmosphere, the interaction. That causes a problem for the player. Repetition doesn't only happen because you've literally done the exact same thing twice. It happens when a decision stops changing. You can fight 10 enemies that look completely different, but if your answer is basically the same every time, your brain catches on. Attack, parry ability, finish, move forward. Then just do it again. Eventually, the monster can have 6 arms, glowing horns, and, the tax records of a small nation. It doesn't matter. I'm still solving the same problem. And that's why this becomes bigger than beasts having repetitive environments or a few weaker fights. The deeper issue is whether the game around a mechanic is actually designed to extract the best from that mechanic. Beast sometimes does, sometimes it doesn't. And you can feel the difference. I would say this is the standard for Beast. Do not judge Beast of Reincarnation by whether the swing of the sword feels satisfying. That's just too weak of a standard. Judge it by whether the game continually creates new reasons to master the combat system. That's the stronger standard. Because good action games don't just give you tools, they create problems worthy of those tools. Think about what happens when the game does this well. Early on, one mechanic solves a problem. Then enemies change. Now that solution isn't enough, so you adapt. Then the environment changes. Now positioning matters. Then enemy combinations change. Now prioritization matters. Then the boss takes everything you've learned and basically says, okay, let's see you prove it. That's progression. Not just numbers going up, not just another skill appearing on a menu. Your relationship with the system changes because the game keeps demanding more from you. That's the standard Beast should be judged against. And to Game Freak's credit, some of Beast gets there. The combat between Emma and Ku is not just some dumb gimmick that's slapped onto an otherwise standard sword game. There's a real idea here. The companion isn't completely passive. Defense feeds offense. Timing feeds resources. Resources feed choices. Choices feed back into the fight. That's a solid foundation. But foundations are exactly that. They're just foundations. Nobody walks up to an unfinished house and stares at the concrete slab and says, man, this kitchen looks pretty good. You still have to build the rest of the house. And that's where Beast becomes uneven. Because a strong combat system cannot carry everything by itself. It needs another encounter design. It needs enemy variety. It needs pacing. It needs environments that do more than move you toward the next area. It needs a progression system that keeps changing what the player is being asked to solve. When those pieces support the combat, Beast starts looking like something special. When they don't, you start noticing how much weight the combat is carrying. And that is the difference between having, a good mechanic and building a good game around the mechanic. Those are not the same thing. So I think the real issue with Beast of Reincarnation is not that Game Freak failed to make interesting combat. I think they did. The deeper issue is that the rest of the game does not consistently push that combat hard enough. Emma works, Ku works, the parries work, the command system works, and the stronger fights prove what happens when all of those systems finally get enough resistance to matter. That's why Beast of Reincarnation is, kind of frustrating. Not because there's nothing here, because there is. You can see it every time the game puts you in the real fight. Game Freak didn't need to invent a completely different combat system. They needed more enemies, encounters, spaces, and situations capable of ranking out the best in the one they already had.